Today, we're with Dr. Ibrahim Jaffe. Dr. Jaffe is a licensed medical doctor who is the founder and president emeritus of the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism. Dr. Jaffe is known for the depth of love, mercy, and compassion which he brings to every situation, and during his lifetime, he's helped thousands of people to find lasting health, love, peace, and fulfillment in their lives. Ibrahim, could you briefly explain the basic tenets of Sufism?
Well, first let me say Assalamu alaikum to everyone listening to our interview today. It's my pleasure to speak with people and to open up the teachings of Sufism to the Western world, and to bring out this particular Sufism, which is Shadhiliyya branch of Sufism. Many years ago, Sufism began when the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was bringing his teachings to the Arabic Peninsula. And this particular Sufism has many emanations from that time. The Prophet came, and his job was to try to bring peace and love and mercy into an area that had become very corrupted, very much had lost all sense of decency in the world. And so if you look at sort of structures of consciousness, that society was structured on the lowest parts of human nature, the animal nature of human self. And it was living in that way. People were killing each other, stealing from each other, beating each other. There was lack of decency, there was no real moral sense of what was. The Prophet came, and as all prophets go, their job is not to be themselves, but to act as speakers and messengers for the divine. In other words, how does the divine wish to structure, change a civilization that has reached the full level of corruption that it reaches? So prophets are always sent in those moments. They show up in those moments to change a civilization, because the role of a prophet is a world teacher. They come as world teachers to change the world. But in the deepest place, the prophets are there to change the very context of society and to make it, in a sense, a divinely based society. Their work is to be divinely based. In other words, how would the divine like society to be? Well, Sufism represents the mystical aspects of that divine society. So there are outer aspects, which you could say are the structures or the morality or the ethics of society or the laws of society. But there's also a mystical dimension to society. Sufism is the mystical dimension of society that comes from direct surrender to God. In other words, if we were able to find the inner reality of God inside ourselves, and if we were able to actually surrender to it and to open our hearts to the experience of that mysticism, that would be the foundations of Sufism. Now, Sufism itself has tenets, but the tenets of Sufism we can talk about in a few minutes. But the key point here is that Sufism is the mystical path, or what we call the tarika. The tarika means the path, the mystical path that reaches to one fully surrendering their body, their heart, their soul, and what we call their secret to the divine itself. And that's the purpose of Sufism. It's to bring forth that complete surrender to the divine, to God itself.
And how do we do that as people?
Well, it's a very good question. Most people, unbeknownst to them, are living a life where their consciousness is focused on the external reality. In other words, they're focused on the world. They're focused on images of the world. So when they close their eyes, what they see are images of shopping centers and images from TV, images from what they're supposed to be. In this country, in the West, grow up, have a good corporate job, make $100,000 or $200,000 a year, have a nice house in the suburbs. This was the mystical images that people carried inside their consciousness. That's what they were focused on. But in Sufism, we realize that those images are prisons, that people are actually imprisoned by their very consciousness. But in other words, what they carry inside themselves imprisons the soul itself, and so the soul suffers from being caught in that prison. Now, how does that suffering play out? It plays out as depression, as limitation, as fear, as anxiety, but those are all nothing more than aspects of imprisonment of the soul. The soul is imprisoned by itself. It's imprisoned by its images. Sufism has many aspects of how we free ourselves from that, but the first important thing is how do we reach the freedom from the images of society? How do we break free of the images that imprison us? So the way we do that is through a series of purification methods, which is that we learn to see the images that restrict us, and we apply certain divine names and divine incantations, if you will, that actually wash those images away. And once the images are freed, the soul can start to have life again. It starts to lift itself up. It starts to have freedom. So the first thing is purification of the images and replacing them with divine qualities. The second most important step is the connection to the godly light. Without the connection to the godly light, even if you free yourself from the images, there's still the tendency to fall back, because it's almost like you're freeing the balloon from its being grounded, but it doesn't have the helium to lift itself up. So you free it, but it can't get off the ground. When you have the divine light's like the helium. It lifts the balloon off the ground and it can go up to the heavens. So the second most important step is the remembrance of the divine name, and the practicing of the remembrance of the divine name. That becomes the helium. That gives you the lift that you need. If you're doing the purification work without the remembrance, you won't get the lift. On the other hand, if you do the remembrance without the purification, you don't free the string of the balloon. So even though you have the helium, you can't get it off the ground. You need both of them to be able to fly.
And how does the person learn to do these things that you've spoken about?
Well, the learning, there are many ways to learn it. I mean, in our tariqa, first of all, you could attend a course with me, a basic course, and learn the foundational teachings. I have a foundations course. You could learn to come to that. There are courses offered by the University of Spiritual Healing and Sufism, which is a very profound way of learning these practices. It's a 4-year program, leads to a master's degree in Sufism, but it also teaches very powerful practices that would free you as well. And then there are local teachers and local community members around the country and around the world, really. So you could find a local teacher who could help you with the purification and the practices. So any of those ways would be very powerful ways. If you're true and you really want to free yourself, and you're committed and you're sincere, choose one of those 3 ways and engage in them.
And in your experience, Ibrahim, how does this manifest in people's lives when they do make one of these choices?
Most people, my experience is that most people's lives are, to a certain level, a mask. In other words, they're living their lives, but their lives are a mask. They're not really in touch with the deeper aspects of who they are. And if you were to reach the deeper aspects of who they were, to understand what's really going on in there is another level. So one is that we don't know it. In other words, we live the mask and we've lost ourselves. And secondly, even if we find ourselves, we don't really realize who we are. So those things are missing. When you apply the Sufi methods of purification and the practices, the mask gets cut from you very quickly. You leave it. It goes off. What you find is who you are. Now, when you find who you are, you're also going to find many things about yourself that you may or may not like. You may find you're angry. You may find you're afraid. You may find that you're judgmental. You may find all aspects of yourself that need to be purified. But that's better than not knowing those things. It's important for you to know those things. But once you find them, the next important thing is to bring those things back to the divine. In other words, when you bring those aspects of yourself back to God, we call that tauba. You make tauba, you return yourself back. What happens is the divine light begins to fill you, and then you start to have the real qualities, and then you have real peace, and you have real love, and you have mercy, and you have compassion. And what you really have is a very deep state of goodness. It's like there's a core place in your being that's good, it's pure, it's safe. You're no longer kind of like a boat rocking in the wind and getting blown here and there. It's like always, always, always your compass is there. Yes, you may get thrown off course. You may hit some depression. You may get hit anger. You may get caught by some aspects of the world. But deep inside your being, the central reality of your being is clean. It's pure. It's good. It's solid. And you know that. And you know you're protected. You know that you could lose everything. You're going to be okay. The fear is gone. You are not afraid anymore. And that's the key. When you have that level of trust, and Sufism will bring that, then no matter what God brings you, God can bring you anything. You roll with the punches. You take them, and you're learning. It doesn't mean it's always easy. But behind it, your central faith, your belief, your trust in divinity, your trust in what we call the tawakkul, the godly light, the godly protection, is solid. In that state, you become fearless. There's a fearlessness inside of you. You are never afraid. And that is the only way to live. To live in fear is suffering. To live without fear is freedom.